Welcome to the StarPodLog comic scene with your hosts, Jeff and Tony.
Hi, I'm Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
Welcome to the comic scene on StarPodLog.
Welcome, and we're glad to be back.
Tony, man, how you been? What's going on?
I've been pretty good. It's had a lot of fun talking Batman here last week, so thought, why not have spend this week talking Spider-Man?
No, I agree, and man, I'm going to tell you, once you and I decided to do this a few days ago, and I started digging in and looking at the stories, this for me, I won't speak for you, but for me, this choosing top three Spider-Man movies, stories was significantly harder for me than choosing three Batman stories. I told you right up front when we decided to do the Batman episode that I knew two of my top three right away.
Yeah.
But this took a lot more soul searching for me.
Interesting. I mean, I'd say for me it's equal. I mean, I know there's got to be great Batman and Spider-Man stories I'm leaving out or not thinking of, but I got three in mind. And I can't wait to find out what three you have in mind, too.
And same for you. So let me frame this for the listeners. So if you listened to our previous episode for StarPodLog where we did top three Batman stories, what we did is Tony and I came up with the idea, and we did not discuss our picks with one another until we recorded the episode. And we're doing the same thing this time. But what we did agree on prior to this recording was we were taking two Spider-Man stories off the table. And the main reason for that is we thought there was a really good chance that those two stories would each end up on each of our lists. And we thought, let's both these stories are kind of a layup.
I mean, everybody knows them that's a Spider-Man fan, and every Spider-Man fan has them on their own list. So, let's talk about three stories that aren't those two. But let's acknowledge them, though.
All right, so let's get into it. We'll talk about the two that we took off the list before we reveal our number ones. But let's get into this. And, Tony, what's your third favorite Spider-Man story?
So, for third favorite, I'm going to go with Spider-Man Reign, Reign. It was, I think, a 4-issue, prestige or glossy cover book from Marvel from maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago. Carrie Andrews tapped into, we talked about Dark Knight Returns for Batman. Carrie Andrews basically did a Dark Knight Returns for Spider-Man. It looks like Dark Knight Returns, it feels like Dark Knight Returns, and it's a futuristic Spider-Man coming out of retirement in a futuristic world. It's so cool because I didn't think a story like that could exist, and I didn't think I'd want to read it, but I did, and it was amazing. And he tapped into everything that made the Dark Knight Returns so special.
I've got to be honest, I have not read that story.
It's worth checking out.
Is it available on trade paperback or?
I'm sure it has to be. Yeah.
It's got to be out there somewhere in some
format.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the covers, the art, it looks like he's just channeling Dark Knight Returns. It's so unusual and so well done. I just have to put it on my list.
Okay. Very good.
So what's your third?
All right. So I this one for me has to be on the list because I don't know if it was because it was a fresh take or it, for all intents and purposes, opened up all kinds of new doors for Spider-Man and specifically the Spider-Verse. But I chose a story called Coming Home by J. Michael Straczynski.
Mm.
And I believe this was his first, I believe this was JMS's first story that he wrote for Spider-Man. But the story is, the villain is Morlun, and Morlun is this vampire who feeds on energy, and he specifically seeks out what is revealed. I don't want to get too spoilery,
Sure.
but it's revealed that Spider-Man and some similar beings across the multiverse share the same kind of energy as Spider-Man, and that is the energy that Moreland seeks out to feed upon. But it's such an overwhelming story of despair for Spider-Man. Yeah. It's just a really J. Michael Straczynski stepped up to the plate with that story and just hit it out of the park for me. And it ultimately opened up the avenues to the Spider-Verse as we know it now.
I was always a huge JMS fan. Babylon 5 to me was a very special TV show that was just moved me watching it as a viewer. I mean, it was such an emotional, such a gripping sci-fi series back in the 90s, and I was so excited to see JMS doing comics. And I do feel his Spider-Man run was probably the best superhero work he's ever done.
I would agree with that.
You know, I was torn because I wanted to add JMS to my list, but in the end I wanted to talk about these other three stories, so I was going to put JMS's run on my honorable mentions, but it definitely needs talked about because it is special and it is some really amazing work.
All right, Tony, what's your second favorite Spider-Man story?
For me, one of my all-time favorite comic book writers is J.M. DeMatteis. And we're going to talk about something else he did here a little bit later. But he started a run on Spectacular Spider-Man in the 90s. And he made the villains very sympathetic, which I'd never seen before in Spider-Man, such as the Vulture. I mean, he made you actually feel and care about these villains as people. And that it was so unique. He had a pretty long run on the book with mostly drawn by Sal Buscema. And the two of them were just an amazing duo. That I recommend the entire run, but I do know their run finished with the death of Green Goblin. At the time it was Harry, not Norman. And I remember at a con, JMS said that the artwork that Buscema drew, Sal Buscema had drawn, was so strong when he got it back, he didn't even put words in it. When the Green Goblin's dying and they're in the ambulance together. And, you know, that is a special run and a special way to end a run. And J.M. DeMatteis is an amazing writer. And one of the best Spider-Man writers ever.
He's a great writer, and I feel like I don't think he's ever gotten his just due, quite honestly. I feel like his name has gone a little bit under the radar, and that should not be.
I mean, you have a guy who writes comedy really well. He writes, superheroes. He had an amazing run on Cap. He had an amazing run on Spider-Man. The list goes on and on. You know, he revitalized Dr. Fate. I mean, Moonshadow with Vertigo is a stunning piece of work. That's one of the best comic books ever made. Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely one of my favorite writers. So what's your second favorite?
All right. So this was, I believe, a 4-issue run in Spectacular Spider-Man in the 80s. And you can find this in trade paperback. I'm a little surprised that it's not kept evergreen. But I thought the Death of Jean DeWolf story was amazing. Maybe it was the time of my life that I read it, but it was.
And that was Peter David?
I believe it was Peter David. Yes.
Okay.
It was darker than any of the Spider-Man stories I had read to that point in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've still got the 4 issues today, and I haven't read them for a long time. But if I'd had more time to read those 4 issues prior to us recording this episode, I would have done so just to see if it affected me the same way as it did so many years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just the way it was framed for Spider-Man to have lost a friend like that, to in the manner that he did, and then Daredevil plays a role in the story, and to me it's a hidden gem.
Mm-hmm.
But I would not. I liked it enough that I did not want to classify it as an honorable mention. I thought it deserved to be on the list.
Yes, definitely a great era of Spider-Man that you're referring to back there.
Okay, so let's talk about honorable mentions.
All right.
Tony, what do you got?
I mean, well, we decided to take two classic stories off the list, but I mean, I wouldn't even use the word honorable mention, but I would say no one comes close to writing Spider-Man the way Stan Lee did. And Stan Lee made amazing Marvel comics, absolutely amazing. But I feel when you look at his body of work, two titles to me stand out above the rest. And Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, I think Stan just bled his heart and soul into Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. You know, and I know as a kid how excited I was reading those old reprints of, you know, Spider-Man and the John Romita art and, you know, Green Goblin finding out who he is and kidnapping him. I mean, Stan told amazing Spider-Man stories, and it's hard to really compare anyone else to Stan's Spidey stories. So whether you want to say honorable mention or, you know, a lifetime achievement award for Spidey, you know, I would say
that's definitely a more appropriate term.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
Well, I was also going to throw Amazing Fantasy 15 on there. I mean, you can't talk about best Spider-Man stories and not talk about,
of course,
you know, amazing. Like, and that was only an 11-page story, which is really amazing if you think about it. 11 pages that changed the entire trajectory of comics, of a company, of pop culture, of merchandising, of movies, and so on.
Right.
But like, and I'm with you. Like, if you go back and read a lot of Silver Age comics now, no matter who the character is, most of them are a little hard to choke down. But the Spider-Man stories and the Fantastic Four stories, they still hold water pretty well.
I have hardcover reprints of his Daredevil and X-Men work, and, you know, they're nice comics, but they don't resemble the classic Daredevil and X-Men books we think of when we think of those characters. But when you think of Spider-Man and Fantastic Four, when you think of classic work, it's Stan Lee's work you think of.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot of honorable mentions I could throw out there. Another one that I put this on the honorable mention list, and the only reason I'm bringing it up is because of the two stories that you and I are going to speak of here shortly. But Spider-Man Blue, if you've never read any of the Marvel, I've heard them called the color line, Hulk Gray, Daredevil Yellow, Spider-Man Blue, and Captain America White. If you've never read any of those, they're all great reads. But Spider-Man Blue is particularly emotionally impacting, I thought.
I'll say my words about it for later.
Okay. And I'll just throw out there that that was also Spider-Man Blue was also done by Jeff Loeb and Tim Sale, who, as we talked about in the Batman episode, are not to draw a pun here, but they truly are the dynamic duo when they get together. Like the stories that they create together is just sheer magic.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, we've talked about already the JMS run. I mean, is my honorable mention. The work he did on the entirety of that Amazing Spider-Man run is just phenomenal.
Oh, his run was fantastic.
And I think too we should also mention if you know, Ultimate Spider-Man, especially the beginning Miles Morales. I mean, Miles Morales is Spider-Man to a whole new generation of fans.
Agreed.
So that's a very special story.
I think you could make a strong argument, and I'm a big Daredevil fan, and I loved Brian Michael Bendis' run on Daredevil. It was character defining to me, but I think you can make a very strong argument that Bendis's I would almost say first 100 issues of Ultimate Spider-Man may have been his best work ever.
Yeah.
And him and Mark Bagley together, again, just pure magic.
Yeah, who would have thought that those two would be writing and drawing that character for as long as they did? It's unbelievable.
Like Tony and I said, we took two stories off the table, and almost certainly they would have been, one or both would have been on each of our lists. But we thought, in the spirit of making a fun episode, we would take them off the list. The first one is Craven's Last Hunt.
Yeah, a phenomenal story by J.M. DeMatteis again.
Yeah,
amazing artwork by Mike Zeck. Bob McLeod, I think, is the inker on that one. Just stunning work.
And again, not to get spoilery, I'm trying to choose my words carefully. So if the listener hasn't read any of these, I encourage you to go out and read all or any of them. But who saw the ending of that coming?
Yeah. I mean, who saw the beginning coming? I mean, who would come up with the idea to start a story where you bury your main character alive?
Right.
I mean,
right.
And I remember I went to a panel at Heroes Con a couple years ago. I think it was last Heroes Con, actually, last year. And there was a panel for this with JM and with Mike Zeck, and he was explaining how at the time they kind of lucked into the black costume still being around, and that was a thing because the story works so much better with the black costume. And he's so right. I mean, it's so much creepier and scarier with seeing the black costume Spider-Man buried alive.
No, I read that story again. I don't know. It's probably been about 5 or 6 years since the last time I read Craven's Last Hunt, but it still holds up so well. It's just
absolutely.
so good. It's damn near bulletproof, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the first or the other story that we took off the table is probably obvious to anybody that's familiar with Spider-Man or has listened to maybe our previous episodes, but it seemed like too easy of a target to leave the death of Gwen Stacy on our list.
Right.
It is a fantastic story. It is everything you've ever heard it is, and it was.
It's heartbreaking.
It's heartbreaking, but it also has had long-lasting implications.
Sure. There are very few comic book stories that hold the test of time and hold their meaning as a story and as a continuity holder over generations like that has. I mean, there are few defining character stories. If each character has just a handful of character-defining stories, I mean, that's definitely the top of Spider-Man's list. I remember when I started going to cons many years ago, I'd met Roy Thomas for the very first time, who edited that book. And I had him sign it for me. I remember asking him, I was like, could you tell me about the death of Gwen Stacy? He's like, oh, I've told it a bunch of times. He's like, well, I haven't heard it. He said, okay, well, Stan was on vacation. So they made sure Stan was on vacation, then they killed her off.
When I started reading comics, I was reading Marvel Tales, and Marvel Tales were reprints of Amazing Spider-Man.
Exactly.
Issues.
Marvel Tales, yep. Me too.
And I started reading it around, I don't remember the Marvel Tales episode or issue number. I think it was 72, something like that. But it was a reprint from the middle of the death of Captain Stacy storyline.
Okay.
With the Magia, the Magia, I don't know how it's basically a thinly veiled version of the Mafia was what they were, organized crime. But it was part of that storyline, and I followed that story right up through the death of Gwen Stacy and then the death of the Green Goblin, and that's a hell of an introduction to comics for a young person.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And what's really interesting about the story, the way it holds up, I mean, it's kind of a trope in comics that if a character dies, well, all right, I'll see you in 3 episodes or 3 issues when you come back. But really, Gwen Stacy never came back in the main Marvel universe. They did the Gwen Stacy thing where alternate universe and whatever, but that was a death that actually had stakes.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting too. You mentioned Marvel Tales because I remember as a kid gravitating to that title and how excited I was. I think I was reading the Stan Lee stuff that was reprinted in there, and I remember a convention ages ago with the Simonsons, and Louise Simonson said like their nephew or grandchild was young and wanted to get into comics, and they found that he really loved the Marvel Tales from Spider-Man. I'm thinking, well, of course. I mean, it really is the perfect, if you're talking Stan Lee or the Jerry Conway stories like we're talking now, I mean, they really are the perfect stories for getting kids into comics and for adults too, that can stand the test of time. I think it's a remarkable achievement what those writers in that era of Spider-Man accomplished, that it can have universal appeal like that.
No, I definitely agree. And if you're not familiar with Marvel's Epic Collection books, those are great collections for reading old comics.
Yeah.
And the manner, their strategy in releasing those books is, to me, quite brilliant. I know it's frustrating to a lot of the fans, but the way they've done it is quite brilliant. And maybe we can get into that in a different episode at some point. But if you go back and find the old Stan Lee and Steve Ditko Spider-Man Epic collections, or I'm sure they're collected in other trade paperbacks, man, do yourself a favor and go back and read some of that stuff. Find out where Spider-Man came from.
Yeah.
Like how it really started.
Another odd thing I just thought of too that I loved as a kid was the Electric Company. The Electric Company TV show used to have live action. It was the first live action Spider-Man we ever saw, and Samuel L. Jackson, before he became a huge star, would intro it, and then you would see on the newsstands that they'd have Electric Company Spider-Man comics.
Yeah, I had some of those. And Spider-Man never spoke in the live action thing. They did the little word bubble thing.
Yeah,
but he never actually spoke.
It was really cool if you're a kid in the 70s to come across the TV and the cartoons and the comics.
All right, man. Drum roll, please. Tony, what did you choose as your all-time favorite Spider-Man story?
Well, it's already been mentioned already. I mean, I would say Spider-Man Blue really, the ending was really powerful to me because here you hadn't really seen Peter remember Gwen or talk about Gwen for quite a number of years, or decades really. And you had this story about the impact she had on his life, and the fact that his wife was okay with that, and let him hang on to that, and wasn't jealous of it, and was accepting of it. But that what he had with Gwen was special, and that his memories of it were just as special. To me, it was just a powerful story, and Loeb and Sale together just made some masterful comics over the years, and that was just another one of the masterful books they did.
I totally agree, and I threw it out there on my list. I didn't want to put it on the list, on my top 3 list, specifically because we took the death of Gwen Stacy off the table, and it just felt like cheating to me. I was like, that's not fair if I do that, but no, I agree. It's such a great story. It's a great continuation. Like the legacy of Gwen Stacy, and specifically her death, has resonated so long in comics.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's your top Spider-Man story of all time?
All right, man. So this might surprise you a little bit. And again, this choice is something of a byproduct because of the stories that we removed from consideration. But when you talk about a short list of Spider-Man writers, Stan Lee's obviously at the top of the list, and there's a couple of others on there, but you've got to talk about Roger Stern.
Sure.
Roger Stern is absolutely in that conversation. Roger Stern wrote a B story in Amazing Spider-Man, I believe it's 248, And the main character, or the main story, was Spider-Man fighting a throwaway villain called Thunderball. But there was a story in the back of the issue called The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm telling you, Tony, I'm certain that you've read it, but if you've never read it, that story gutted me when I read it for the first time. I did not see that coming at all. At all.
Right.
And it again, similar to the 11 pages of Amazing Fantasy 15, it's a short story, but it has a tremendous impact. And it really humanizes Peter Parker.
Yeah.
It really shows you, the level of integrity that he has. It's a great story. It has to be available out there in some format. I know that there's a Roger Stern omnibus. I actually own it, and there's one that is, I think it's going into reprint in January, something like that. And I'm not 100% certain, but I think the story is somewhere in there. But man, if you ever get to read The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, it's just A+ story. Top notch.
I have a hardcover. It was actually sold from Sears, which is really strange, back in the 80s. And it has a leather-bound cover. It's really cool, with Spider-Man cover, too. But it's all different best of Marvel stories over the decades. And that story is definitely one in there. So I got some signatures on that book over the years, and I met Stan in the 90s in Pittsburgh when I was in my early 20s and got him to sign that. And I know that over the years, if I'd go to a creator that didn't have a lot of time and was walking away from his table, I was like, can I get one signature? And he saw Stan's signature. It's like, I got to sign next to Stan. I got to sign it. Like Chris Claremont, Sal Buscema, it's like, yeah, I got to sign next to Stan.
There's so many stories that we could have probably discussed here. I think top three, we were really cutting ourselves off at the knees. But
sure.
in the interest of brevity, I mean, we could have talked about how the Secret Wars story ultimately led to
Secret
Venom,
Wars, the black costume. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of, the Maximum Carnage
the whole
story.
Superior Spider-Man run was amazing
The whole run. The whole Superior Spider-Man run. To me, that story was Dan Slott's finest hour. He never came close to that before or since.
I mean, he humanized Doc Ock in a way you never saw coming.
Yeah.
It's a remarkable achievement too. And like you said, there are just so many Spider-Man stories. It's hard to narrow down to 3, even when you take a couple off the table.
Yeah, it is. So our last episode, we introduced a segment that the working title for it is still What You're Reading. And Tony and I are discussing the comics that at the time of recording any particular episode. So, Tony, what you reading?
Well, over on my stack to be read right now, I have Maestro #1, which, if you remember the classic Peter David and George Perez Hulk feature Imperfect, where he introduced the Maestro, they're finally going back and talking about the Maestro again after all these years. So I'm excited to see what Peter David has to add to that character. And also, one of my favorite artists of all time, if not my favorite artist ever, is Neil Adams. But when you let Neil Adams write his own material in the last so many years, it doesn't seem to make much sense. So I'm excited at the new book that's just out now. I have issue 1. I got to pick up issue 2. Fantastic Four Antithesis. He's never drawn Fantastic Four ever, too. So
that's him and Mark Waid, right?
So you have Mark Waid, who knows how to write, who's actually writing a story for Neil Adams. So it's a pretty awesome combo.
I'm definitely interested in checking that out. Mark Waid and Neil Adams working together on Fantastic Four. Just the description alone, okay, you have my attention.
Exactly.
I'm definitely interested in that.
So what's on your reading stack there?
All right, so the last time we did an episode, I had just started the Cloak and Dagger Omnibus, and I'm still plowing my way through that. I'm about 60-70% done with it.
And those are that's another area of Spidey we could have included too. Those are great stories.
Yeah. But I got a notification from the post office that I have a huge box waiting for me. I'm going to go pick it up this weekend, and inside that box is the entire run of Invincible in hardcover. Have you ever read Invincible?
No, I haven't. I've heard great things about it, though.
See, I haven't read it either, but I was convinced to buy the first hardcover of it. And I mentioned that to a friend of mine, and he said, "Listen, man, you might as well just go buy the rest of them right now." he said it's great. He says it's his favorite superhero run ever. And it just so happened that I caught, and I won't mention the website's name, but I happened to catch a sale on Image Comics 50% off across the board. So I went ahead and took the plunge, and I took him at his word, and I bought the entire run, and I'm going to pick it up this weekend. And maybe at some point in the future, if you decide you want to read it, you can borrow mine after I'm done with it, and maybe we can do an episode on it. That might be kind of fun.
Yeah, cool. And another way to tie this all together, the artist on Invincible is the current artist drawing Nick Spencer's Spider-Man, Rick Ottley.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, he hasn't been the only Spider-Man artist, but he's been the main Spider-Man artist for Nick Spencer's current run.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, man, this was a fun episode to do, and
yes, it was.
I want to thank StarPodLog for having us back.
Absolutely.
And,
thanks for having us back.
Make sure that you like this video, and make sure you share the video. Subscribe to StarPodLog all over social media, and please drop us some comments. Let us know what we got right and what we got wrong. We want to hear your favorite Spider-Man stories. We want to know what you think of our opinions. Just give us some feedback and let us know how we're doing.
Absolutely. It's been great talking Spidey with you. Whole lot of fun tonight.
This has been a fun episode, and again, my name is Jeff Wiley.
And I'm Tony Barletta.
Thanks for listening. We really appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the force be with you. Nanu Nanu.